It's now my distinction to introduce our Luncheon Keynote speaker, Mr. John Smart. A little bit of background on John. He's the founder and president of Acceleration Studies Foundation, which is a nonprofit association community that seeks to help organizations better understand and manage accelerating change. Well, if we haven't heard about change in the last 48 hours, and you, whether you're a sergeant major or wherever you are, if you haven't heard about it or felt it, John Smart's going to talk a little bit about it from his foxhole. Yes, I'm an Army guy, from his foxhole. He holds a BS in business management from UC Berkeley and an MS equivalent in physiology and medicine, the University of California San Diego School of Medicine, and an MS in future studies from the University of Houston. Operative word is future, and you're going to see that demonstrated in a couple of minutes. Author of book and currently writing a second one at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm U.S. Naval Institute and FC International welcome to John Smart.
Thank you so much, General Dubia. It's an honor to be here and to spend this lunch with you today, looking out. And it's never been more important, has it, to look out to the horizon. Now, futurists are a small breed. There's 22 places where you can get a master's or a PhD, 4 of them in the U.S. I got mine at the Houston program, which is the oldest, 1972. We put a man on the moon, and we figured, well, I might as well have a program for looking at where things might be going 10 years and further out. And that's what futurists do. So I'd like to ask you to let your hair down a little bit today. We have a microphone stand. We'll have a chance for some questions at the end. And I don't think this is being taped, is it? So I think what you say is not going to go on YouTube tomorrow. So you don't have to worry about embarrassing yourself. Because when we talk about the future, when we talk about the long-term future, it gets kind of embarrassing. I mean, there's amazing things that are happening all around us today. And half of the future is just what's happening in the present today in the labs. And people don't even realize how fast it's going. Yeah. I was just talking to Al Grasso here of MITRE, and we were talking about RC planes, and you know, it's surprising to us that you know, we grew up with these RC planes, and we had these little controllers in our hands. Well, the kids today, they have little Arduino chips that they're putting on top of the servos, and they're flying these RC planes using their iPads, and they're just setting waypoints. And the planes are basically flying themselves, and that little chip is basically taking over for what a bird would do to basically keep the thing stable in the air and have it reach a waypoint. And of course, there's a lot of security issues for things like that. I mean, that's a small platform. You can weaponize that. Those things actually, the first RC plane flew across the ocean, like, remember Lindbergh? When? Anybody want to guess? Was it this year? No, it was 2007. So the future is always coming at us faster than we expect, isn't it? And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. So my talk's called Leadership of Technology Change. And I gave you guys a read ahead. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at it, but it's kind of my calling card in 10 areas of technology where I think things are going to be going over the next 10 to 20 years. Your command horizon for a lot of the folks here in middle management, right? Senior command. The key issues are thinking about the juniors. Who are the right people that are paying attention to these issues? How do you get them empowered? How do you protect them? Because innovation in a military culture and a defense culture is a challenge, isn't it? And we'll talk about that too. So, I have to start with a theory of change. Every futurist has one, and here's mine. So, this is a slide that basically, and these slides are available. There's more words on these slides than you want to look at. Okay, so just if you don't enjoy the words, just to listen to me. And you can get these slides afterwards. They'll be on the AFCEA website. But this slide basically, and this book, Cosmic Evolution, basically is telling you that change isn't going to slow down. What Chason figured out in 2001 is that every next generation leading edge system that emerges uses less space, energy, time, and matter to do a standard computation or a physical transformation. So we started with galaxies, stars, planets, then we had human brains, and now we've got our Pentium chips, which are 1,000,000 times more energy rate dense than the human brain. So what does that mean? That means they compute and they channel energy per second and per gram 1,000,000 times faster than a human brain. It's not saying they're 1,000,000 times more complex. But what it's saying is that they're computing, they're learning at a rate that's 1,000,000-fold faster than you and I, which means they're catching up real fast. So the argument here is that this stuff isn't going to slow down. It seems to be baked into the universe. Okay? It's not something we're creating as much as it is something that we're discovering about the physics of the universe. Anybody heard about neutrino communications? Remember that earlier this year? Fat-fingered 20th century human beings communicating with neutrinos. What are those? 5 orders of magnitude smaller than electrons? We can use those to communicate through solid Earth, directly through the Earth, because neutrinos don't respect the Earth. Remember that? Neutrinos just pass right through it like it's nothing. That's just amazing that we can do that. And that's because of the physics of this world that we're in, okay? So things aren't going to slow down. But my clicker is going to slow down. So let's see if I can get a second one. I got backup. Here we go. Backup's working. Always have a backup. So my theory of change is at this little community, Evo Devo universe. And basically what it is that there's 3 basic things you have to understand about complex systems. They evolve, they develop, and in the middle they compute, or they select, or they adapt. Okay? And so evolution, computation, and development are basically the 3 big words that we need to use when we think about the future. What that says is our universe and complex systems are about chance and necessity, and the mix of those two to create utility. So chance, necessity, and utility are kind of the 3 words that drive complex systems value, right? What has to happen, what could happen, and what's useful or adaptive. And there's basically 2 patterns that you see when you look at the future that are really important. Trees and funnels. So remember the tree of life, that means an evolutionary process is just creating more diversity over time. So more cultures, more species, more academic specialties. Okay? That's an evolutionary process. More product. Now, a funnel is something that basically takes diversity out and hits a future target. If you think democracy has to happen in the future, if you think women's rights and minority rights have to advance all across the planet, that certain moral codes are inevitable, well, now you're talking about a funnel. You're talking about something that's highly predictable. So as futurists, we try and understand what processes are tree-like and what processes are funnel-like. The best way to understand those is to look at 2 identical twins. Now, you look at 2 identical twins from across the room, and they look the same. And that's because they have these developmental genes that are hitting a future target. So they're developing in a particular way. But if you look at those 2 twins up close, everything about them that matters is different. Their fingerprints, the way their brains are organized on a microstructural level, all of that is happening in a tree-like, bottom-up, competitive process in those 2 twins. So if you look at the genes of those twins, what you discover is only 5% of our genes guide our development. The other 95% of our genes create that tree-like variety that we talked about. So what this means is that there's kind of a rule. There's a basic kind of a rule of thumb that we can use when we talk about evolution and development. Most change that happens in the universe looks like it's bottom-up. It's evolutionary. It's tree-like. And only a critical 5% is developmental. So that's true for genes in an organism. It's also true for our thoughts. At least 95% of our thoughts are unconscious. We're not aware of them. And we have this sliver of consciousness that looks down and then tries to create order on it. Most of our decisions Our behaviors are environmental reactions. They're not things we plan. They're things that happen based on our bumping into things in our environment. That's why we need to have as smart an environment as we can create to make ourselves smarter. And most of our decisions and actions in an organization are out of control. They're happening bottom up, like this book, Out of Control, discusses. And it's also true that most social innovation occurs in economic markets rather than government policy. Most new IT products and services empower the little actor, the network node, rather than the hierarchy. And we see example after example of these that are empowering the little guy, the bottom up, more and more. So this is a bottom-up future that we're heading toward. And when we look at evolution and development and computation, that thing in the middle between them, we can make some simplifications. So here's one of them. We can create what we call an FIS model. We can say that, well, complex systems are about freedom and security and the blend of those two to create intelligence. Now, in defense culture, we're all about development. What's predictable and what do we need to protect? But notice, I just told you that 95% of the change that happens to create intelligence is in the freedom side, the evolutionary tree-like side. So this means we have to think hard about all the new freedoms that are emerging and how to keep security in that environment. And so it's become tougher than ever, hasn't it? So another way of looking at this is evolutionary things are about innovating and experimenting. Developmental things are about protecting and predicting, and computational systems are trying to learn or adapt. So innovate, learn, and protect, an ILP model. And these are our leadership challenges. So again, defense culture is all about these two. But this one is constantly happening, and we have to pay attention to it. And finally, we can say there's 3 leadership tool sets here. So people that are in the middle are trying to ride the dragon, and that's management and strategy. People that are over here in the security side are all about foresight and what's predictable and what do I need to protect. But like I said, 95% of the change that's happening is bottom up, and that's on the innovation and entrepreneurship side. So as leaders, you guys got to think about how do I get more innovation and entrepreneurship in my defense culture? And I'm going to be giving you some examples of that in a minute. So the next major topic is what things are developmental? Let's take a look at some of the stuff that's coming in the next 10 years and what's predictable. So I gave you my read ahead, and I said there's 10 areas of change that you want to think about. And these 2 are special. Information tech and nanotech are pretty much driving the acceleration. The rest of these we're steering politically and socially, and then, of course, this is the meat. This is what we care about. And I've stuck it at the end because these are the vegetables you got to get through to kind of get to the meat and think about security appropriately. Okay? So if infotech and nanotech are the levers of change, these things are constantly being hyped. There's always people out there talking about how they're going to change the world with a particular technology, and they all follow a hype cycle. And a book like Mastering the Hype Cycle is going to help you recognize how important it is to manage that hype. And you have to get to what's called the plateau of productivity, which is after the hype, that's when the technologies finally deliver. And that's usually 5-8 years after they've been hyped. Okay, so you pay attention to stuff, and it's very easy to overreact to it. When we think about information tech and nanotech, there's really 2 phrases I'd like you to keep in mind. Kind of information technology is really kind of the steering system of accelerating change. What's happening is the smarter our machines get and the smarter we get, the more we think first and act later. And that's the promise of simulation. All these new simulations platforms that the military is using for understanding and doing wargaming and red teaming, that's really the future that's kind of steering security, because really the smarter we get, the more we think rather than act. As kids, we spent most of our time playing in physical space. And there was a Harvard study 5 years ago that said we spend maybe 15 minutes a day playing as adults. in unpredictable ways in physical space. And you think, well, wait a minute, that means adults are dead, right? I mean, but no. We actually are playing as adults, but where are we playing? In here. We're imagining things. As kids, we had to do all that physical playing to wire up all these simulations. And then as adults, now we run fast through the simulations and try all these interesting possibilities out and then find those few things that fit with our values the best. And guess what? That's what our machines are learning to do too. They're learning to think first and act later. Okay? And so the rise of scientific simulations, and the machine simulation data doubles every 2 years. So this is really the future. The other thing you have to really recognize is how important nanospace is. It's the engine of accelerating change. Photonic crystal lasers that were invented in 2006 that are 1 million times more energy efficient than the previous microlasers. Or a programmable synapse that's a model of a human brain cell that's 1 million times more energy efficient, or 1 million times faster, and 1,000 times more energy efficient per computation than a biological neuron. Or a fuel cell that has 10 to the 5th more energy per mass than a chemical battery. And that is theoretical. We haven't reached that yet, but that's where we're going. So if you don't believe that you can create these little flying insects, these little flying microbots that are going to have 3, 4, 5 times longer ability to fly than a hornet, because their fuel cell is that much more efficient than a natural biological fuel cell. Well, you've got to talk to Daniel Nocera, because he's going to tell you how we're going to beat these natural systems. And today we're several orders of magnitude below that, but that's how fast these systems, these nanosystems, are improving. Okay? So change isn't going to slow down, and some of it's disturbing. I mean, here's an example. Uranium laser enrichment. Okay? Now, some of you folks in the room, some of the folks in the nuclear subs understand this stuff quite well. In the 40s to 70s, our grandparents, that was the gaseous diffusion era, right? There's a lot of energy and space and people to create weapons-grade uranium. And then we moved to the ultracentrifuge area, and one guy, A.Q. Khan, stole that technology and basically proliferated to Pakistan and all the nuclear proliferation problems we have today. And that was 50 times more energy efficient than gaseous diffusion. Well, starting in 2006 with a breakthrough in Australia, we have laser isotope separation coming next. Right? The first plant is going to be built. The NRC okayed it in September of this year for Wilmington, North Carolina. So this is a tunable laser that actually tunes to U-235 but not U-238, strips the electrons off of it, ionizes it, and now you can take it out of a gas stream. Now, so we are on top of this. We tried to put speed bumps in front of this technology in the 1980s, and we did. But there were too many people involved. And so then we decided, well, let's own it. Let's be on top of it. But even there, we couldn't be on top of it. It was the Australians that made the breakthrough, and we invested a lot more in it. It shows you how unpredictable this stuff is, doesn't it? So here we are today. Now we're in a world where we can see, 50 years from now, a small amount of energy, a small amount of space, and a pipe to seawater where there's plenty of uranium in solution, allowing some small super-empowered actor to be able to create weapons-grade uranium. Now, that's a very serious world. What's our response? Well, here's our response, I think. We need a global immune system. We need to build, and what we are doing now is building a global technological immune system. In your body, there's no place your immune cells can't go. They go everywhere. Think of the spiders in Minority Report, if you remember that movie, right? Now, in that world, you got to protect privacy, corporate secrets, trade secrets, but anonymity goes away. Somebody does something bad, and you're going to serve out the digital subpoenas, and you're going to unpack that data, and you're going to find out who did what. And so ISR is really the driver of this kind of a future. And there's two types, and this book, Network-Centric Warfare, is an excellent book on kind of how good the Navy is at creating shared pictures. And really, ISR and these shared pictures of how the world works is a key part of this immune system that we're building. And this book, Wired for War by Singer, I highly recommend as a way of approaching this thesis that our ISR, our robotics and automation, and our precision strike and defense, in that order, are the three things that are driving the current revolution in military affairs. So when you think about transparency, I'd like you to think about this book, which is still the best, 1998, so that's ancient in futurist speak, right? But it still says it the best of any book I've read, which is basically that the way democratic societies accept accelerating transparency, the way that we get to this world where we don't have to worry about laser isotope separation in somebody's basement in 50 years, is we've created this kind of fishbowl world where everyone's watching everybody else in the public spaces, and somebody starts to go off down that road as a kid in high school or whatever, and we give them extra resources. We give them extra support and extra transparency to keep that kid on the straight and narrow. And that's the kind of a future that we can see that works like a biological system. It's resilient, it's redundant, it's fault tolerant. It's like the way a biological immune system works. So the way democratic societies accept transparency is they need 95% of the cameras being in their hands. Remember that 95% evolutionary, 5% top-down? So Google Glass, which comes out next year, these wearable cameras, do you know that that's a life log? That thing is taking a picture every 10 seconds. It is constantly recording everything that you hear around you and transcribing it into searchable text. And you say, I'm not going to wear that. That creeps me out. Yeah, okay. But will your kids wear it? And if your kids wear it, you've got something to deal with. You've got a security issue to think about. Because there's good and there's bad coming out of that technology. Now, part of the good is people are going to feel okay with more ISR from the top because they're going to have the checks and balances from the bottom. But there's bad issues with regard to that too, as well. So everybody who has Gmail, and I've had it since 2004 when it was created, is a blogger who doesn't know it. All the best, or any other web-based email system, right, which is most of them now. So I want you to imagine a world in 5 more years where Google takes all those things you've written about, and now it can match you up with the other person in the United States who's thinking about the same topics, the other 5 people that think about the same topics as you are. Say you want to start a new business. Say you want to do some new activist thing, right? Say you want to do something that's kind of disruptive. Google's going to let you find those people without showing you each other's email. Do you think the kids are going to turn that feature on or not? I mean, full speed ahead, right? That's what kids do. So there are disruptive things coming from this, and this is a world, as Gordon Bell and Gemmell say in Total Recall, this is a world where all the things that have happened to you in the past now are kind of a voice query away. And that's because of this, because of something called the conversational interface. So in 2003, I wrote this paper, The Conversational Interface, Our Next Great Leap Forward. And if you hit Google Conversational Interface and hit I'm Feeling Lucky, you get my paper because it was the first one on it, and a whole bunch of other people linked to it, and I guess it was written well enough that people thought it was worth thinking about. And my argument there was, my prediction there is that these machines we're going to start speaking to the web. And we're going to speak to the web in simple sentences like the IBM Jeopardy challenge where Watson beat the pants off the 2 best Jeopardy champions in February of 2011, if you saw that. But we're going to speak to the web in complex sentences by the end of this decade. And that's a really interesting world. That's a world where 2 billion more kids around the world can learn English. How? Through the wearable wrist PC, that waterproof wearable wrist PC they're all going to have. Now, why are they all going to have a waterproof wearable wrist PC? Because Google's going to give those out for free because they're going to sell location-based ads on the side, aren't they? So is, of course, Microsoft and anybody else whose business model revolves around this new web. But the thing is, in 2020, these systems are not going to be like Siri or Google Now today, which work reasonably well. These things are going to work very well. They're going to understand emergent grammars. We're not talking about an AI that has a world model. We're just talking about a statistical language map that's so good that a kid growing up anywhere in the world, when they learn the word for their local language, they're going to look down on the back of their wrist and they're going to see the English language word for that same thing as well. And a little picture that's going to help them learn it, and a little game they can play that's going to test whether they know that word. And now that kid knows English, and they're going to, their LinkedIn ranking on English is going to be in their LinkedIn profile. And now we're talking about 1 billion new kids around the world who speak our language, who can work for us virtually through virtual telepresence, right? Once you have 100 megabit per second broadband, which everyone's going to have in 8 more years, now you've got 1 billion new virtual immigrants working in all these small startups, doing good things and doing some bad things too. That's a really different world, isn't it? And I guess the last really interesting thing to think about is that these kids are all going to be connected up with each other. Remember, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And everyone have a lifeline? Well, psychologists know that we have a Dunbar number. There's 150 people we can deeply model socially. So I want you to imagine a kid growing up in 2020 with 150 kids, highly cognitively diverse, all future lawyer, astronaut, future doctor, future engineer, future movie maker, and they're all connected up with each other, and they're all helping each other to solve problems. And when those kids go for a job interview in the future, there's going to be the open book, there's going to be the closed book version where they have to turn off their symbiont, so the kids can't speak to them through their ear and watch them through their Google Glass. And then there's going to be the open book version where the kids solve problems while they're connected to their lifelines. And companies that don't allow open book interviewing, those companies are going to be kicked to the side, aren't they? Because most of the productivity of these kids is going to happen while they're connected or while they're not. I mean, probably the former. And again, that is a very different world. Now, some of the good things about this are a kid who starts to go into a negative space, or a kid who has bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever, you can connect up to 150 normal minds, and guess what that's going to do? That's going to seriously reorient that person's mind. That's a level of psychotherapy that we cannot afford today. But it's also a world where you can have what the security people call a folie à deux, madness of 2 or 3 or 4. Remember the bogmad, the bunch of guys that were massively asymmetrically destructive? That's one of the terms for the Hamburg cell in Germany that thought up 911. So that's a very dangerous situation where you have anonymous money coming in from the outside and a bunch of young 20-something guys all kind of bidding up to see how much more radical they can get to try and get access to that money. So that shows you how important it is for us to have transparency in all the global currency. Well, thank goodness we've got these RFID chips in all the money now. Now think about the power of the ISR that's going to come when all of those flows are built into our maps. And we can see how important this kind of a future is. All right, so let's do a quick wrap up. What's a time check here? Okay, so we're going to conclude with some leadership strategies. So first off, you want to, in your department, you're trying to get more innovation in your department. And one of the most important things is to understand who the people are who are evolutionary oriented, who are innovators, and the people who are security oriented. They're the protectors. And so there's tests like the Curtin adaptation test, which basically show you that. The people who think in terms of funnels and the people who think in terms of trees. And you want to be able to find those people in your department who think about innovation and get them together with each other and protect them. And you want to find those people who are concerned with the security and get those folks together and support them. But in defense culture, that's not the problem. The problem is supporting the innovators. You want to figure out what your strengths are, and you want to build a strengths complementary team. The Strengths Finder test will tell you your top 35 workplace strengths and tell you what your top 5 are. Well, the important thing as a leader is to figure out who has the other 27 strengths that you don't have. And how do you bring those people onto your team so you have a cognitively diverse team? And so you start out with things like understanding your biases, understanding the emotional blocks, that's the breaking the fear barrier to innovation. And then once you're good at managing yourself, then you can move in and become much more effective at managing people. So I think this is a really valuable way of looking at things. Another one is to ask yourself, who's doing innovation well already that I can use as a benchmark? And I can give you 2 here, DARPA and Google. Both, well, ONR as well. Somebody mentioned ONR in our discussion before the talk. And ONR is more resource constrained than DARPA, so they've had to be even more creative in coming up with value per dollar. Well, how do these guys do that? And how can I apply that in my command? Well, they find the people who are oriented to radical innovation. They get decent technical intelligence around their real options. They give those people freedom. They make it okay for them to fail. And then they review their failures and see what they can learn from those. They make their units small and flexible. They make the organization as flat as possible. And they constantly rotate the talent to give new blood a chance. And that's the DARPA model. And then on top of that, Google adds a measurement culture, a feedback culture, and an analysis culture, and an orientation to end users and to automation. And building your tools first. So here's a few good books on that. And so let's look at an example. Let's say you think technology is becoming biological, and you know about Boeing Scan Eagle, this drone that gets launched from a catapult off of a small Navy ship, and you have to use this hook and try and hook its wing when it lands. And you've seen a seagull land, and you say, wait a minute, that's pretty elegant. Look at the way that thing throws its wings and its tail feathers out, and it just kind of settles down. Could we design a drone that could do that so I don't have to try and hook this thing when it's coming down? Well, I believe you can. If you understand how Fowler flaps work, and if you've seen how easy it is to reconfigure with these servos to make these wings 2, 3, 4 times bigger for temporarily to come into land, well, that's something that could be done today. But you have to ask yourself, well, okay, what would landing like a bird on any plane do for a small naval UAV? Would I be able to have more of them? Yeah. Well, how do I quantify the benefits of that for my ISR platform versus other real options? Who are the people that can do that? How do I pull those people in? Who can best support a study? So I have to do competitive intelligence out there to see, is it ONR? Is it DARPA? Is it, some other defense community? Is it who has the best R&D competency out there amongst all of my suppliers? And how do I best do procurement? Another thing that's really important when you're managing for innovation is to have some good models. And I'm going to suggest 2 for you. The Benfold under Mike Abrashoff and his 200-page book on the innovation that he did from a top-down, personality-driven style. And a lot of the stuff that he created, as you can see, were databases, were platforms. So he was thinking kind of like Google, really. Build the platform and they will come. And then an excellent counterpoint to Abrashoff is David Marquette on the USS Santa Fe nuclear sub, right? And what he did was not a top-down visionary style approach to innovation, but a very bottom-up, what's called a servant leader or a leader-leader style, making everybody into leaders, self-managing, moving out to managing others. And he really changed operational performance and sailor and officer retention over a 2-year period. And again, there's another short 200-page book that's just an excellent example of how you can apply this in your own command. And when we speak about platforms, how many people here have used Intellipedia? This is the intelligence version of Wikipedia. Any hands? I see a few, yeah. So there's 3 levels of classification, and that's a great start, isn't it? That's a tool that everybody can add to. That's a classified tool for sharing information and breaking down silos. Well, do you know how many other tools have come out since then that are awesome? I mean, here's one, Spigot or Bright Idea. These are tools that don't let you, they collect the ideas that everybody has in their network, in the social network that you're using internally. And then you can't vote on one idea as the best. What you have to do is you have to compare ideas in each category and say, Joe's idea is better or worse than Jane's idea. Jane's idea is better or worse than Jack's idea. It's called pairwise comparison ranking. And by this pairwise comparison of ideas that have been suggested in each sub-area of your command, the best ideas bubble to the top. So your crowd is forced to look at all the ideas, and that way that one great idea that's sitting way out there in what's called the long tail of innovation, where nobody looks at it because the guy who came up with it is kind of crazy and he doesn't smell very good and he kind of, does his own thing. That one great idea gets pulled out by a tool like Spigot or Bright Idea and brought out into the fat head where everybody can look at it and say, everybody thinks this is a great idea. Let's see if it really is. And then you can do benefit cost analysis on those. There's whole societies that have built up around BCA now, last 10 years, to rank those 3 best ideas. You can't create a great quantitative measure yet. We don't have tools that are good enough for that. But a great qualitative ranking of those 3 best ideas can be done with BCA tools today. And then as leaders, you have to ask yourself, how do I best find my small expert team, because it's only a small expert team that gets things done, isn't it? Look at the Skunk Works model for Lockheed, right? And then how do I do my supply management to make my suppliers as competitive as possible? Because I got news for you. There's an unpopular truth here. Small firms are much more innovative than large firms. They can't do a lot of things large firms can do. They don't have the scale or the talent, right, or the capital. But on an innovation per dollar basis, they just outcompete like crazy. Because small firms have that 2% of market share, and they're trying to go to 5%, aren't they? And big firms, like Clay Christensen said in Innovator's Dilemma, their job is just to hold their market share. So they do what he calls innovate and wait. They want to get to the future first, sit on it, patent it, and then release it only when they're forced to release it by who? A small firm trying to go from 2 to 5% of market share. And James Hasek makes it very clear in Arms and Innovation that this is true in the defense industry just as well. So we're going to close with this last slide, and that is a Navy brand innovation challenge. When you guys are thinking about the rest of your command 10, 20 years out, and you think, well, what kind of vision do I want to give to the public that they're going to buy into, so they're going to see the Navy as an innovation center? Now, anybody see the million Department of Veteran Affairs Million Veteran Project? Anybody see that earlier this year? They decided to take 1 million veterans' diseases and connect them up to 1 million veterans' full DNA scans. So the DVA realized that they had the unique ability to create the largest database that connected diseases to genetic profiles in the history of the world. And that was an incredible innovation strategy coup. Because I can tell you, there's going to be some genetic and personalized medicine cures coming out of that data that you and I are all going to benefit from. So that was brilliant. What's the Navy's brilliant response for innovation brand. I'm just suggesting one. This may be completely wrong, and here's my suggestion. Open, safe, lawful, and sustainable seas for all. Now, I know some of the career people in this room are going to say, well, the Navy is about access, it's about open and defense, and maybe it's a little bit about safe, but it's not about sustainable. It's not about these other things. Well, the policing back 20 years ago was just about law enforcement and investigation. And then it became about crime prevention and prediction, public safety, homeland security, and community service. And my argument is this. If you see something developmental coming, you see this storm coming, you can either get in front of the parade or get driven into it as it grows, right? And my question to you is open, safe, lawful, and sustainable? If you were to create a public GIS map, do what the Navy does so well and create these pictures that have all the shipping and defense access maps, the piracy, trafficking, humanitarian relief, alliances, international agreements, the disputed territories and disagreements, and they're all there on those maps. Well, now the general public understands that all the sensor grids and maps in the oceans, on the partner coasts, on the commercial ships, on offshore platforms, on free-floating constellations that the Navy has set up, on every seamount in the ocean, and all that stuff's feeding into a public grid that we can all look at. Everybody's going to see that as mostly a bottom-up surveillance kind of a future. And so I want to ask you, is that part of the Navy's ISR future? And so thank you very much for your time.
We have time for a few questions here, about 2 questions. Anybody who would please come to the microphone and ask you a question of Mr. Smart.
John, that was one of the more invigorating discussions I've heard for a long time, so thank you very much. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Here's a quick question that's sort of a dilemma that I think about once in a while. We know that we have some trends that we're living with. One of them is that life expectancy is pretty much on a vertical rise. And the other one is that, interestingly enough, the world is depopulating to the point that the economies of a lot of countries can't survive.
Yes.
So what do your futurist friends think about some of those dilemmas that we face?
So you mentioned the depopulating. What was the one before that?
The rise of
longevity?
Life expectancy, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We're seeing a clash of cultures that we've never seen before, because we have these older folks now who are high functioning, who are living 10 years longer than they did before, and they've got all this life experience, and they're up against all these kids that are running all the tools and building all the new machines, and they've got a completely different culture. And so both of those have a tremendous amount to add, and I think they're both going to become more important going forward. So I think longevity is going to give us more wisdom at the top end in politics. We're going to see more of these 90-year-old senators and 90-year-old CEOs and stuff that are functioning people, because our lifespan really can be pushed out to 110, maybe even 120. Now, beyond that, we start to fall apart at an accelerating rate from the inside out. So I'm not one of those futurists who believes that we're going to see these kind of magical super life extension things on the biology side. But we certainly are going to see another 5, 10, 20 years of high-functioning, healthy lifespan, and these so-called super longevity people who are out there doing really great things in their 90s. So I think that just means more conflict, but also more wisdom, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. And on the population crash side, that's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, most people still don't get that. The maximum number of new kids that are coming on board is going to be 2 billion between now and 2040. And it's probably going to be less than that. It might be 1.8 billion. And that's it. From that point forward, the total number of people on the planet starts to shrink. Because in every developed country, people have less than 2.1 kids. Less than replacement rate. And why they do that? Because they can put more resources into their kids. Kids become liabilities in a developed country rather than an asset, which they are in an underdeveloped country. So that means, like the Japanese are doing, we're going to be putting a lot more of our, depending a lot more on our automated systems, aren't we? But at the same time, it also means we're going to be depending a lot more on all these hungry kids. Remember who built the great network of the 1800s? It was the hungry immigrants. It was the Chinese immigrants built the railroads. Well, it's those hungry billion new virtual kids that are all going to be speaking English through their wearable web cell phones that are going to build the internet of the next year, of the next generation. Okay, it's those kids. And when we recognize that, we can think, okay, there's a lot of positive change coming. The entire economic miracle of China was driven by maybe 300 million underemployed peasants. And I just told you that there's going to be 3 or 4 times that many English-speaking virtual immigrants coming into the world over the next generation. So we have barely begun to see the economic miracles that are coming out of these underemployed smart kids that are going to be in our two-way living rooms, by the end of this decade.
Thank you. Early on in your conversation, you talked about that triangular model where you had chance and the opportunity and then the utility of things.
Yes,
and then you talked later on a little bit about the idea of creating a smarter environment to live in because it would create things.
Yes, sir.
What do the futurists think about the possibility of being so smart about the smart way we create our environment that it actually boxes in chance and forces us into a dead end in terms of thinking? Because you create the environment and chance and an opportunity start to disappear.
So there's a great book, well, actually there's a number of books on this concept of the echo chamber, which is this idea that kids can set up their filters to have any kind of information coming into them from their social networks. And some of these kids set up their filters to have only the stuff that reflects their biases. And there's already good psychological data that those kids are less innovative. They're less aware of what's happening, and they get disrupted faster. So the best book, and I had a slide on it, was by Scott Page called The Difference. And the subtitle is Why Cognitive Diversity Makes Better Teams, Organizations, and Societies. So remember I talked about StrengthsFinder and the 32 different strengths and how you and I have maybe 5 of them. And so strengths-based leadership, that book says you got to find the other 28 out there and or 27 and get those people on your team too. So there's already a lot of good data that if you want to build your smart environments with as much cognitive diversity as possible, or you get your lunch handed to you by some other kid coming up with some innovation faster and faster than ever before. That's really important, cognitive diversity, to fight that echo chamber, because the people who go into the echo chambers, they become irrelevant pretty quick. And we think of, when we look at North Korea, I mean, what a perfect example of these. There's a few of these little places that are cults of personality that are entirely echo chambers. And, you look at North Korea from space, and you just see a black hole, don't you? I mean, these are the Amish cultures that are, okay, I don't want to offend any. I love the Amish. The Amish will debate whether they want a rubber band in their society, right? And they use cell phones. They use rubber bands on their terms. They use cell phones on their terms. So it's important for us to be critical about our technologies, but there are certain echo chamber societies like North Korea that are just very quickly becoming irrelevant. I'm not saying the Amish are going to become irrelevant. I think they're going to be around forever. I love them. Okay, sorry. Well, all right, thank you very much, guys. Yeah. And you have my email. If I can help out, I'm just an email away, and I use LinkedIn as my social network, so hopefully I'll see you there.
Yeah. John, don't go away. I'm going to recognize you here briefly. Again, thank you very much, Mr. Smart. Your comments today, when we talked about accelerating change, everything you said here represents accelerating change. And we're going to see that across our armed forces, across our country, and across the world. Small token of appreciation to you is a book from the Naval Institute with a bookmark from AFCEA, Circle of Treason, the CIA account of Traitor Aldrich Ames. Thank you very much, John.